This is going to be crazy, but I'm going to try. I'm Andra Keay, and I'm reporting on Maker Faire for Robohub. I was at Maker Faire with my robot hackerspace, Robot Garden. We had a booth, and we were there for the setup and the maker dinner the whole weekend. And fortunately, there were a lot of people helping me in the booth, so I got to walk around and go to some of the presentations. And Maker Faire is huge. For anyone that hasn't been, this was the 8th annual Maker Faire, and Maker Faire Bay Area is still larger than any of the other Maker Fairs, including the World Maker Faire, which will be in September this year, somewhere in the east of America, I don't know where. But there were 165,000 people went through the doors of the Maker Faire this year. There were hundreds of stalls, hundreds of exhibits. You never see everything. You just don't. There are so many things that I wanted to see and didn't get to, and I kept discovering unexpected surprises everywhere I turned, and it's a very inspiring kind of thing. It is crazy as well. I'm wearing some of my steampunk get-up because that's the vibe that's there. It's a little bit anarchic, it's a little bit steampunk, it's a little bit arty, it's a little bit funky, it's definitely got a lot of homegrown, a lot of DIY, but mainly it smells like revolution. And this is the quote from Tim O'Reilly and Lee Felsenstein, that this is the revolution right now. Lee Felsenstein was one of the featured speakers, and he designed the first commercially successful personal computer, the Osborne 1, with Adam Osborne, and that was based on Alan Kay's design from Xerox PARC in 1976. Lee Felsenstein was part of the free speech movement in Berkeley in 1964, and he had a lot to say about what are the characteristics of revolution. You tend to only see it in hindsight. It has to have mass participation. You don't know what it is when you're in it. You don't know how far a small seed will stretch until you turn around and look back at it. But he says that this has all the hallmarks, and he's been through the cultural revolution of the 60s, the personal computing revolution, which he sees the internet as just an extension of, and now the DIY making new industrial revolution as the next thing. And this was a theme that was echoed by Nolan Bushnell, another featured speaker, who's the co-founder of Atari and employer of Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, that the power of creativity is exemplified here. You could look around and the only thing that you can't see at Maker Faire is apathy. And that is what is a critical feature of growing disruptive and successful companies like Atari, like Apple. It was really great to hear those talks, but often the really interesting things were the hidden gems. And one of the things I tried to look for was robotics companies. I had a huge list of companies that were there. I found some that weren't on my list, and a couple that I really like. Well, I love OpenRov, the Open ROV guys, David Lang and Eric Stackpole, and the whole community that they've built up around their open source underwater vehicle platform, because it's as much about growing a community of users and developers as it is about developing the actual robot. And David Lang blogs about From Zero to Maker, about his journey at not having any technical skills and learning them, getting caught up in a vision and then acquiring the skills that were necessary to see the vision into completion. And those are very powerful, inspiring stories, and it's a great community. One of the other highlights for me was seeing DJ Suarez and Alan Campbell from Easy Robot, and they were presenting their robot in a box kit. I've got one of those at our Robot Garden hackerspace and we're playing around with it, but I saw him 2 years ago at my very first Maker Faire, and he was presenting rough prototypes. What he has now is a successful commercial operation that's continuing to expand. I think he's now employing 8 people. He has distribution through Daegu, and we're seeing a lot of the transition from prototype, from hobby project to commercial production runs to actual successful businesses. And that doing DIY does not mean that you are not building businesses. It doesn't mean you have to, but it doesn't mean that what you're doing is not commercially viable. And another two companies in that path are Robo, who are a spin-off from UC Davis, NSF funded originally, and 2 years ago they had a really cool modular robotic system, but it was large, it was milled aluminium, it was primarily aimed at university researchers, and they've been refining till they've got a beautiful 3D printed plastic encased modular motor system and a really nice user interface that goes along with it. This is now definitely a kit that's suitable for not just high school robotics, but middle school robotics as well. And I've actually seen younger kids playing with these robots very successful. And they're quite powerful and capable of doing a lot, very beautiful configurations, but mainly a really gorgeous user interface. And they've just launched a Kickstarter. So Robo have a Kickstarter for their new version, the LinkBot. And one of the beauties of the LinkBot is that it's capable of being programmed without having to have your computer there. You can trigger master-slave modes just by pushing buttons on each of your units, and you can program from one to the next by controlling it, setting it into positions, and that opens up a really nice tangible learning experience, because as you make one motor do the things that you want it to do, you can mirror that and you can set that and record that and then rerun. And I think that Robo are just going leaps and bounds. And another new company, not quite ready to go to Kickstarter yet, is Fellow Robotics, and they produced a low-cost self-balancing telepresence robot similar to the double robotics one, but what they've found is they're actually going beyond that in terms of the software that they're developing. So their interface with their robot is going to be far more web friendly, and I think they're heading in some really interesting areas there. And the other thing is they've got, I think, a full motor controller board. That's what people wanted to buy. They looked at the board that they've designed for their robot, and it was popular. So they might turn around and do a Kickstarter based on one of the things that they've got in development, not an entire robot. And I guess that's leading to one of the things, what I found very interesting there, had a lot to do with looking at components, looking at chips, looking at sensors, and looking at the creative uses that people were making of things that you might not have thought were that exciting just on their own. And then you see how someone has utilized a couple of key features of a comparatively low-cost component or sensor, and you go, wow, that's really cool. And we're seeing some new things coming out in that space too. Too much for me to talk about with that, but one of the great announcements this week, it was launched at the Hardware Innovation Workshop, is Massimo Bonsai's Arduino Robot. A little pricey for some because it's around the $279 mark, but Arduino robots are such a big thing at the moment. Using Arduino with robots, with a whole heap of projects, and to have an actual nicely designed wheeled robot base with a number of the key things already integrated on Arduino, it gives an entry point into doing robotics exploration that I think is really exciting, and it's just beautifully designed. Everything that Massimo Bonsai is involved in is just beautifully designed. So that was really cool, and cool tools. 3D printers everywhere, and some beautiful new designs using just 3 kind of rods dropping down to the head rather than having shuttling movements laterally, having things coming to one central point around the head and moving that way. Some beautiful rail systems so that 3D printers are so stable. People are walking around carrying printers on their backs, in their hands, tipping them up and down. They're printing. Brooke Dunn from Printerbot was printing in a plane at about 30,000 feet. I don't think people knew about that, but it's saying 3D printing is definitely everywhere these days. And we had the first 3D plastic recycler as one of the projects through Robot Garden, our hackerspace, which is the Omnom project, and that launched again at the Hardware Innovation Workshop this week and was on display at Maker Faire. And Michael, the inventor of this particular 3D plastic recycler, which is the first actual working one in the world, takes your old 3D printed parts, and it doesn't matter whether it's ABS or PLA, you just have to run the same batch, turns them back into filament that you can put into your 3D printer and go again. And it will also be able to take things like your water bottles. It's just a case of you've got to have things all of the same sort of plastic, or you're not going to get decent filament at the end. But I think this trend to recycling is fantastic. And another great tool was the HandyBot from ShopBot, which is pretty much, go look it up. The HandyBot is going to be a staple for every construction worker and every hobbyist, I think. The way things are changing there is really good. But for me always, and for the rest of the world, I think it's the big crazy art projects that are often the most appealing things. And I saw a lot, Flaming Lotus Girls, particularly the human mousetrap game, the human-sized mousetrap game. They didn't actually use people in this one, they crushed a car. A number of other ones, Flaming Dragons, the Electric Giraffe, beautiful things with light, with the Tesla band. But Hand of Man is a project from Christian Ristow, a fairly well-known artist, roboticist. That's always really interesting. It's been a staple of a lot of Maker Fairs, and I was able to hear him talk about the development a little bit, but for me the real highlight was Mark Satrakian talking about developing robots for Robot Combat League. And I've managed to get some video of that, which I'm going to post, but it was wonderful hearing the process and seeing the slides that he had of the development of those giant fighting robots for Robot Combat League, and some of his challenges in it, what constrained his design, what influenced his design thinking. And unfortunately he couldn't say terribly much about where he's going next, which would have been pretty cool to find out. And not to forget education space. I mean, the maker movement is growing, and it's integrating a heap with public libraries, with schools, fab labs, and maker groups are becoming a very cutting-edge part of the libraries and schools that I'm aware of. It seems to be a really great direction, and what is not to love about a lot of the new DIY electronics and robotics styled toys and groups that are coming out. We had Ruminate, Goldie Blocks, just Hacker Scouts, among so many groups demonstrating their products and just running really fantastic workshops, engaging with the community of all ages. But definitely kids were getting their hands on and doing a lot of really great stuff. You know, I hope everybody comes away from Maker Faire terribly inspired and excited by what they can do themselves. It's not, it's certainly not a passive experience. You go and you are really invigorated. But two of the trends overall to finish off with that I saw is new pathways to business. I'm seeing that more and more. I talked to a few of the robotics companies and a few of the other hardware companies. Some of them get off the ground with a small amount of angel investment funding, often family and friends funding, often their own personal investments. And it enables them to get this far down the runway, to build up a team and to build up their prototype. And that's the point traditionally where you would be out trying to sell that to VCs or other angel investors, or to get licensed through major companies. And that's the point at which they're saying, well, if we get a lot of investment now, and we will still need a fair amount of investment to manufacture, we're going to be surrendering a large amount of equity in our company. And we don't need to do that yet. We're going to do some more product market fit testing. We're going to explore our options. We're going to crowdfund the manufacture of this iteration. And then we're going to be in a much more powerful position when it comes to negotiating for our next round of funding beyond that, because we will have demonstrated that we have backing, we will have iterated on our design, we will have gotten our manufacturing contacts, and we will be able to get more investment for less equity. And we all also have a lot of experience under our belts. And that, I think, is a really exciting new trend in thinking. And the final thing that I saw as a big trend is one of the other robotics-ish companies that was there was Bartendro. They've got a Kickstarter at the moment. They're a cocktail-making robot, and they've appeared at a number of events in the San Francisco area, including robo games, I think for a couple of years now. I'm not totally certain, but I have seen this robot and its makers at a number of other events. And I think the power of these really early bleeding edge prototypes and creative thinkers cannot be underestimated, because this is the sort of thing that other people, perhaps with more resources, go away and iterate over the top of. So the big hit, I think, from Google I/O last week was Maker Shaker, which is a robotic bartender system using KUKA arms, and it's a much bigger, more impressive system. But how much of the influence of the last couple of years of barbot competitions and early versions of robotic bartenders like Bartendro, how much of an influence did they play in shaping the development of something like Maker Shaker? It's not really an answerable question, but I think that you really need to have people pushing the boundaries a lot, and you're going to be seeing things that aren't well polished, aren't well finished, aren't very expensive, that can't afford to be, but they're creating the first prototypes for things that you will see in more bigger, more expensive, more public, maybe more successful, maybe more beta. And beta is better. I love Maker Faire. I don't know how much I'm able to convey about that. I'm looking forward to next year already, and if you haven't been, please go along, because it's so much fun, and there are very few opportunities to blend a lot of the technology with art, with issues of society. What do we want to do? How do we want to do it? How do we have fun with machines? All of those sorts of questions to me are really interesting, and this is a place that poses them and answers them in constructive and positive and fun ways. Thanks.